Greetings, Junior Travelers, and welcome to another edition of Deck Tech with me, Senior Explorer Frodan. Together, Yahoo Esports and I have been journeying all across Un'Goro to look at every single class and talk about what decks you can be playing for the expansion. Today, we look at Druid and see what Druid really has to offer to the expansion, and boy, they've got a lot of options. So Ravasaur Run is one of the first cards that we see from Un'Goro in this deck. Its battle cry says if you control at least 2 other minions, adapt. Remember, adapt has 10 options. You can choose one of those 3 that gets presented to you. And there's a lot of really good ones. +1/+1 makes it a 2-mana 3/3. If you're able to get +3 attack, that's a really strong threat for just pushing your opponent down in a lot of health. Even if it gets Divine Shield, it's kind of like shielded minibot. So don't underestimate Ravasaur. It's very, very good. Plus, he's really cute art. Totalan Forager is a card that gives you a lot of card draw, and you just know that whatever minion with 5 or more attack comes to your hand, it gives you some late game punch, not to mention the body is still passable. Eggnapper is probably one of the unsung heroes of this deck. It reminds me a lot of the Haunted Creeper, where just because it's so annoying to deal with the 1/1s being left over, it ends up being very effective. And Eggnapper is also statted aggressively. It's got 3 attack and 1 health, so while it's easy to remove the first half of the body, it's still got a lot of damage to the point where anything that trades into it is really gonna take a lot of damage, or if you have to use your own hero power, to accept 3. Very good card and especially powerful in a token-based deck. The Murloc package in this deck is based around the classic Finja package, Finja, Murloc War Leader, and Bluegill. So that gives you an ability to also just win the game through that if you're not already winning through tokens and Savage Roar. The last card is what makes it pretty interesting here. Living Mana. Transform your mana crystals into 2/2 minions. Recover the mana when they die. So what you end up doing is you end up losing your mana crystals temporarily until your 2/2 minions end up dying, but if they don't never die, you can just keep attacking your opponent for what ends up being 10 damage or more. And yeah, it might kind of suck to feel like you're limited by mana and you can't really play much, but if you're pressuring your opponent significantly, like you innervate this out even on turn 1, you're gonna kill your opponent in 3 turns. So this is a very powerful card, and I love that people are experimenting with this. Now, this deck is pretty straightforward. The strengths and weaknesses of their deck are that it floods the board, it gets bored really fast, it's able to end the game with Savage Roar. The weaknesses, of course, is that it doesn't really have a lot of good card draw, so if you sweep it 1 or 2 times, it's pretty much gonna fizzle out. A lot of these decks used to run Violet Teachers and a few other ways to get tokens onto the board, or even some other ways to get card drawing, but nope, this deck is just pure, raw, zoo, fast board tension. And if it's able to get ahead onto the board, it'll get a really quick win against you. The primary strength of this deck is just how fast it gets from the board, very similar to a zoo-style Warlock. And if you're ever far behind, it's able to compound its lead by adding more stats, or even the worst case scenario, end the game through Savage Roar. The really bad thing about the deck is that I think one area effect card really sets you super far behind, because then you have to play a rather weak minion, and then things like Power of the Wild and Mark of the Lotus have a significantly less impact. So if you're trying to target this deck, try to use one of your area effect cards to decisively sweep the board 1 time and watch them struggle. So the early game mulligans are fairly straightforward. You want to get things like, the Squire, Firefly, and even Bloodsoul Colossaire, because it's early game board presence with patches. And then if you have Power of the Wild or Mark the Lotus, really good, but you have to make sure you have a really good board first. Don't just keep Power of the Wild and Mark the Lotus if that's the only card that you're keeping. Say you're throwing away 2 living mana to the Defender of Argus. Don't keep just Power of the Wild. Finja is also a card worth keeping, because if the matchup goes slow enough, Finja can win the game in 2 turns following. You just pull out the Murlocs, attack, pull out more Murlocs, and just win the game. Living Mana can actually surprisingly be a good keep if you have Innervates of any capacity, either turn 1 or turn 3, maybe turn 2 if you have the coin. The only thing that really punishes you are things like Devolve and Mass Dispel, so keep that in mind depending on what matchups and classes you're playing against. You can definitely make some cuts in this deck to make it even cheaper. Right now, it's a little bit under 6,000 dust because of things like Finja and patches. But you can cut Living Mana if you want. You can go ahead and replace them with Swipes, because that is a direct damage spell that Druid has in their disposal to end the game too. It just gives you a lot of range. Another card you can replace for budgetary concerns is Druid the Claw. You can use it to charge a lot of times and get that extra damage in, or maybe just protect some of your other threats if you want to protect War Leader or maybe even your Eggnappers. Okay, so that was a really fast deck tech in general because that is probably, in my opinion, the strongest version of Druid currently in the metagame. But I know what you guys are thinking about. Druid, this entire expansion was about big rampy stuff. Jungle Giants was the quest, and getting out huge ramp-style Druid decks. We got a bonus deck for you guys to take a look, because I also really wanted to see how this deck would do, so I played it myself for a while, and I loved it. It's by AdaMarie. It's a ramp Druid. The only reason why I was hesitant to show you is because it's freaking expensive, guys. Look at how many legendaries you need. I think it's 12,000 dust in order to get this deck. But if you could afford it, by all means, let the whales swim. The first thing that stands out to this deck is you look at the curve and you've got over half the deck at 5 mana or more. You have Cairn Bloodhoof, Moonglade Portals, the Black Knight, Bog Creeper, Giant Anaconda. All these things are so expensive, and we haven't even gotten to the 10 cost where you play double Deathwing. And you might be thinking, I like ramp, there's just too much. There's too many big minions. I can't get them all at the same time. That's where cards like Barnes and Yashiraj really come in, because they actually help you squeeze that out. And what's really nice too is that Barnes has additional ways to synergize. Before, people used to theory crap that Barnes had to hit like only Death Rattles or only Yashiraj, but now Barnes can hit cards like the Giant Anaconda. Giant Anaconda, a very important card in this deck. Every time it dies, well, it was only gonna die once. So when it dies, it summons a minion from your hand or 5 or more attack. So Barnes hits Giant Anaconda, summons out Ysera, which you've been holding for the entire game. Or, let's say Barnes hits Cairn Bloodhoof. Bloodhoof is a 1/1 token that summons a 4/5 on Death Rattle. There's a lot of really good hits with this deck. So the general strategy with the deck is the usual ramp. You have Innervate to gain 2 mana crystals temporarily, and then you have Wild Growth, Jade Blossom, Nourish, and Mire Keeper. All these are capable of gaining crystals. I actually highly recommend that whenever you have Nourish, to gain crystals instead of draw cards. There's gonna be some cases where you have nothing in your hand and you wanna draw cards, or you're so far ahead that you wanna draw cards and you're okay with it. Well, in most cases, you wanna use Nourish to gain crystals, because look at how heavy the deck is. And if you're able to Innervate Nourish, or Innervate Jade Blossom, or Innervate or Coin Wild Growth, these are all really powerful plays to set up your future turns. Early Scale is a very important card because most likely whatever minion you summon out, you should be able to gain a lot of armor. And in the best case scenario, you gain 12 armor for 1 mana. So that's really, really powerful. Oh, and I guess the +1/+1 is also a really nice bonus too. I love playing this deck because it's just so cool. It appeases the Timmy inside of me that just wants to play big stuff. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of Bog Creeper. If you feel like you can't really afford this deck, I would highly recommend cutting some cards like the Black Knight. It's a very situational tech card that you don't necessarily need. And you can play Black Knight with another taunt, such as Sunwalker. Sunwalker is a card that's not bad against a lot of aggro, and also it's pretty decent to summon off Barnes because it's kind of like a Noyotron. You have to toss 2 bodies into it. It can gain you a lot of health. If you don't have Cairn Bloodhoof, I'd also recommend a second Sunwalker here. Outside of that, you can't really cheapen the deck that much. I would highly recommend you guys explore your own budget alternatives, but I gotta tell you, one of the most satisfying things I've experienced is when I hit Barnes into Deathwing Dragonlord and it summoned all my dragons onto the battlefield with Ysera, Deathwing, and a Primordial Drake. It was super epic, and I popped off at that moment. The strengths of this deck are very clear. What you really need to do is just to ramp and hit big minions, and you're just gonna out-resource everyone because your minions are much better than everyone else's, and you're gonna be hitting 8 to 9 mana when your opponent has 4 to 5 mana generally. The weaknesses of this deck, very clear. You can just die because you're too busy ramping and taking time to gather all of the resources needed to summon these crazy strong minions. So be very careful. Don't get too greedy, especially if you know that your opponent's playing an aggressive deck. Mulligans are very straightforward. You want to have Innervates, Wild Growth, Jade Blossom, anything that helps get you ramp early game. Mire Keeper could be a valuable keep as well because it gets you a body and Wild Growth at the same time. The thing about cards like Wrath and Swipe is that they're not actually actively helping you for your win condition, they're just stalling. Wrath and Swipe are much better after you have already ramped. So while you might have Wrath as an option, I would highly recommend only keeping Wrath if you know that you have other ramp options with it. Don't forget the fact that Barnes has to summon something that's in the deck. So if you have something like Yashiraj in your hand, or you have giant anacondas in your hand, you can't summon it with Barns. So if you're doing opening mulligans and you're thinking like, oh, I can play greedy by keeping certain cards, you're throwing it away from the Barns pool, which is part of the reason why you want to keep Mire Keeper, because you also use it to exit out of the Barns pool of options for a minion summon. That wraps up this edition of Deck Tech. Hope you liked our bonus content. We double dipped into Druid because we like you guys so much. We hope you guys enjoyed the content. Make sure to check out all the other videos from the Deck Tech series from Journey to Un'Goro expansion by Yahoo Esports. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys out there in the jungle.
Well played.
Hey Junior Explorers, hope you guys enjoyed that video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out some of the other content. We've got lots of other Hearthstone stuff going on here on the Yahoo channel. Maybe it'll even help you survive.